put a lot of infrastructure along the coast that was not built to any code or standard or zoned properly, and we paid for it. And we're paying for it now.
%80 of our city is destroyed.
It's as though our life ended on November 9th and started over.
I live in a house now. It's not my home. You know, I am grateful to be alive and that everybody's safe, but there is something said to have a home and not a house.
We always hope that disasters are a wake-up call, but we're getting pretty used to them in a way, because every year we have disasters and they multiply.
This was called the yo-yo fire. You're on your own.
We've never had a storm of this magnitude. And nobody's ever had a storm of this magnitude.
This country, we are very optimistic being, in a sense. You know, that make us, I think, great country, great people we are, right? But at the same time, that optimism makes kind of feel invincible, and that's a problem.
We are on a trajectory that we cannot stop, but we can slow it down.
We really don't know to what standards our homes and communities are being built.
What I would tell people is that you should look very closely at what the actual risk is where you've decided to live.
You know, there's a risk living in this great country, and we have to figure out how to adapt and become resilient based on what Mother Nature throws at us.
We've got to stop this insanity where we design to the bare minimum, build, have Mother Nature destroy it, we rebuild, only to have it happen again and again and again.
Good morning, my name is Cliff and welcome to Candid Conversations on YouTube and also on 101candidconversations.blogspot.com. Today I'm joined by George Siegal, and George is a documentary filmmaker and also a specialist, I guess if you can say, in weather. And we're going to talk about a documentary that he's done called The Last House Standing. Welcome aboard, George. Thank you very much for coming in and doing this with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Cliff. I appreciate it.
So The Last House Standing is a documentary that talks about how weather affects people with regard to their housing. Is that a good assumption to make?
Yeah, absolutely. The premise or the point behind the movie is that we buy homes, build homes, choose where to live without truly understanding the consequences that could be coming our way. And every year we see billions of dollars in damage, whether it's from hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, earthquakes. And I think people don't put enough thought into it. You're spending what could be your biggest investment on a home without any true understanding of what's going to happen if things go bad, and you end up paying for it.
And things do go bad. I mean, there have been major hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes, and of course we have fires in California. All of this affects people on a daily basis, pretty much. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. You know, this is one of the most volatile weather patterns for any place in the country, the United States. If you look at the layout of the United States and the different zones where bad things can happen, and they happen all the time. And I think does that mean you don't live there? No, but it means maybe you need to put a little more thought into what you're living in if you live there. So you're living in a home that can survive the hazards that might come your way. And I always say that I think more people know about the icing on the cake than the ingredients of the cake. And the ingredients of what is in your home and how it's built is probably the most important thing you could know. It's nice to have granite countertops. It's nice to have nice flooring and a beautiful backyard close to a school or a park. But those aren't the things that are going to save your life or your investment. That's the icing on the cake. The ingredients in your house are the most important things you should understand.
Mhm.
And most people do not.
So most people do not understand what really goes into a house. And in this documentary, you go in depth to look at how a house is built and how it's structured.
Yeah, we show a number of ways that houses get destroyed, and
Mhm.
then we interview victims about how prepared they were for that kind of disaster. And then we talk about how you can build your house better. And on our website, thelasthousestanding.org, there is a resources page that has a lot of great information on there that can direct people to knowing what they have to do to have a safer house, how you could build a house that's to a higher standard. And I think everybody should check those things out. And sometimes it's as simple as, okay, maybe there's nothing you can do. Well, then you better make sure you have really good insurance, because insurance is your last line of defense. If something's going to come in and wipe out your house and you're willing to take that risk, at least don't risk everything you have in terms of your investment. Now, nothing will bring back your personal memories. You know, if your grandmother gave you a photo, if your grandfather's Letterman's jacket, or just things that are passed down from generation to generation, collections, gold coin collections, stamp collections, photos. Once those things are destroyed, you never get those back. Insurance can't cover those. So try to find a way that you could take those things if you had to evacuate. You know, you have to establish your priorities, what's important to you, and try not to lose that.
And do you actually go into how to prepare for that kind of situation where you're going to have to evacuate? The fire is coming, the tornado is going to hit, the hurricane is, miles away, but it's clicking pretty fast. It's coming down on you. Do you actually, in this documentary, show people what they can do with regard to prevention?
Yes. And one of the things can be as simple as have one of those big bins in a closet in your house and a list of things you would want to grab if you had to evacuate.
Mhm.
Because imagine I came to you and said, hey, Cliff, you got 10 minutes to get out of your house, start grabbing stuff. You may spend 9 minutes thinking about what you want to get. Well, if you had a list that said, take yearbooks, take picture of dad, and it was just a list you could run down and grab those things and throw them in that bin and get out of there, that can mean the difference between having those things and not having them. And that's a simple thing that's easy to do. And I would encourage people to do it. You know, if it's a nice day where you are when you're reading this or hearing this, and you think, I think I'll go to the beach, I think I'll go to the park, just take a couple hours and do something to make yourself safer, and then go do those things.
On the other side of this, of course, are the people who are building these houses. And is this also a message to them as well? Like, hey, guys, you need to build better.
It is, and that's an uphill battle. You know, builders are in a business to make money. I've never built a house with somebody that I've liked afterwards, because it's just a challenging industry, and I think it's tough for them. I'm not going to say all builders are one way or the other, but they're in a business to make money. They're not necessarily in a business to give you the safest house you can have. So who's got to look out for you? You do. And when I've talked to builders, I say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And they said, well, we don't know that the consumer will pay for it. And then I say, well, why don't you be the builder that says, here's what you need. Here's what you should do to have the best house possible. And those are the only houses I'm going to build. I would think that would be a huge marketing thing for builders, but they don't do that. Some of the track builders, some of the builders, they build the cheapest house possible. And if you've ever been in a house that's had flood damage or had a problem and you've had to tear open the walls, a lot of times there's garbage stuffed in there. There's beer cans. There's just not a lot of respect coming towards the people that own it. And again, I don't want to put everybody in the same category. There's a lot of really good builders out there. There's a lot of builders that have pride and really care and build great homes. But there's a lot that don't, and we end up living in those houses.
That must be scary when you think about, particularly after the hurricane has come through or after the flood, and then you look and you see the guts of the house, and you say you find beer cans, you find garbage in that premise. after that house has come down, that must be shocking to the people. And that's one of the things I want to dive into here. What is the most fundamental thing people will say to you or have said to you in this documentary that is shocking to them about all of this?
Well, they didn't think it could happen to them. You know, I think we all live a life where we go, you know, nobody goes out and says, I'm going to get in a car accident today.
Mm-hmm.
But when you do, your car has airbags. Hopefully it has a 5-star crash rating. There's a lot of things that have gone into preparation to make that car as safe as possible. Well, now say, okay, what happens if a tornado hits today? What happens if a hurricane comes in the next week? What happens if an earthquake? What about a wildfire? And I don't think those kind of thoughts go into the way those houses are built, because when you see the disasters every year, it's the same story. It's just different tragic victims of they lived out in the woods because they wanted to be out there away from the city. And okay, but there weren't enough ways to evacuate. The brush was really close to their house. The house wasn't used. Fireproof paint wasn't used. The embers got inside the different vents and openings around the house. You know, there's a million reasons why things go bad, but I think what I found as the commonality among all the victims was they just didn't think it would happen to them. Plain and simple.
And that must be one of the things that must have shocked them. And also, as a documentary filmmaker, did it shock you?
It upset me. It upset me for them. It's very difficult to interview people that have just lost everything. I have a certain sensitivity to that because they have this look in their eyes. In 1998, I was working in San Antonio, Texas, and there was a tornado that hit Moore, Oklahoma, and I had to fly up there and do a story about it. And I interviewed a woman who the only thing left on the slab of her house was a bathtub and a mattress that she held over her to keep from getting sucked out of the house. Everything else was wiped clean. It looked like new construction. And she just had this look in her eyes that stuck with me to this day, this glazed look of like a bomb just went off and you are just stunned. And I see that with a commonality with all victims from a storm or a disaster, is that shook look on their face of, wow, we just went through this. And it's heartbreaking. And that's what motivates me with this film is I want to see this stop happening. I want to see the disaster hit, and maybe you had some damage, but you did some things to prepare, so you're not losing everything. You're not starting from scratch. You didn't just get wiped out. And that's what drives me to make and promote my film, The Last House Standing. I want people to realize it can happen to you, so do something about it.
How did you go about making this film? Where was the genesis? Where did you begin to do this?
Well, I had this idea since I think it's about 2010, but I never really found a way to theme it or to make it happen. And then when I moved to Florida, all of a sudden Mexico Beach happened, Hurricane Michael, 2018, and I saw that one house that was left on the beach, and I go, wow, that is the last house standing. So I called and tracked down the owner of the house and got him to agree to an interview. And then I tried to find all the other pieces to fit to weave a story. I contacted FEMA. Very hard to get FEMA to be in a documentary film because most people want to blast them for, you know, the frustrations people have after a disaster. Everybody likes to point their fingers and blame FEMA.
Yeah.
But we went to them and said, look, we're not even talking about how you handle disasters. Let's talk about preventing disasters. So we got in to see them because we were not going to destroy them. We're actually an asset. We're trying to say, look, let's avoid this happening at all. And then there's a gentleman in the film who my videographer saw on 60 Minutes, this guy named Hank Ovink. And some people might remember that name when Hurricane Sandy, I think it was 2010. I'm not sure of the year exactly. But President Obama brought him in to help rebuild this area in New Jersey and to help figure out what to do.
Right.
And so I started contacting him, and he's from the Netherlands. It took me over a year to get him.
Wow.
And then just piecing together all the different experts and then going to places where there's disasters and trying to get people that would talk to us about it so we could interview them. So it's a long process. It took a couple of years, but I'm really proud of the final product. And normally when I do something, I always find something I could have done better. And I'm very critical because I'm just hard on myself. I love this film. I think that if everybody saw this film, we would have we would have safer homes. We would have people demanding more from builders, and we would have people caring more about what they were investing in and why they needed to protect it.
Yeah, and the other thing I noticed that you are actually a trained weatherman. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not a meteorologist, but I spent 14 years doing the weather, and I've worked with a number of meteorologists. And one thing you learn from that is it's not an exact science. And there's a lot of times, with Hurricane Michael, they thought that was going to be a Category 2 hurricane. Overnight, it spun up into a Category 5. We've already had a few storms this year. It hasn't been that bad a season yet. It probably will pick up considerably over the next few weeks. But a storm looks like it's going one way and then it turns, or just on a day-to-day basis. The other day, the weather forecasters here said it's going to be a nice day, and then it was pouring rain. And that happens a lot because it's not an exact science, which makes it even more important that we're prepared. Because if you're looking at that cone as the hurricane's coming near you, but you think, I'm all the way over here on the left, it's not going to get me, the storm can turn. So you need to be prepared.
Yeah, I mean, even up here in Canada, we've seen some things happen. Hurricanes have actually hit into the Maritimes, and here in Ontario, we've had tornadoes up in cities like Barrie, and also London, Ontario. Even one here in my city, which is Hamilton, Ontario. We had a tornado. We've seen this stuff. In Montreal, you can get wicked storms in the winter. There was a great incident that happened back in, I want to say, the early 2000s or somewhere along that line. I'll have to sort of find out again, but it was an ice storm that hit. It took out infrastructure to the point where even amateur radio operators had to get involved to help with communications, because it took a lot of infrastructure out. So, and it did kill people. So even here in Canada, we face these kinds of things. Edmonton, Alberta has had tornadoes. And I remember one thing when I was living out there, you watched the weather. Here in Ontario, it doesn't seem to be a thing as much, but out in Alberta or British Columbia, you watch the weather. And is that another thing too you would encourage people to do, is like take interest in what's going on weather-wise, particularly now with climate change?
Absolutely. I would have a NOAA weather radio. You could buy those off of Amazon, and it alerts you if there's an emergency weather warning in your area. It starts beeping and going off and letting you know. And so when you're talking about Canada, for example, and you say, well, these things are rare occurrences, but they do happen. Well, when it's a rare occurrence, it's a lot easier to get insurance for it. If you live in an area that's not a flood zone, it's not expensive to have flood insurance. And the FEMA director, Brock Long, said to us in the film, if it rains where you live, your house can flood. And we saw with Hurricane Michael or Hurricane Harvey. Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, Texas. And most of the people that were damaged and lost their homes were not in a flood zone, which means flood insurance would have been very inexpensive for them to have. So if you live in Canada, you want to make sure your insurance policy covers what might happen, even if it's remote, because it might not be expensive to be covered for that. If you're in the winter in Canada, you might have a backup supply of food and batteries and things if you were hit by an ice storm, if your community was shut down. It's just simple things you can do to anticipate what might happen, even if it's a remote chance. Because what people find out is when it does happen and you're not prepared, you're the person sitting in the gas line for 12 hours waiting to get gas. You're the person standing in the grocery store waiting for them to put out more diapers or formula or more water for you to drink. Well, if you did that a few weeks before just to have a storage of it, you may have nobody in line. It's just a regular trip to the store. But people don't do that. Even in Florida, the news media covers this every time there's a hurricane coming. It's the last minute people buying plywood and all this stuff to try to shore up their home. Well, it's a little late a lot of times to do that right when the disaster's coming, and your adrenaline's pumping and you're scared. You have to figure out how to survive. Planning should happen on a sunny day, not the day the storm's arriving.
Yeah, and that's a thing too. I mean, good awareness of the situation around you. Do you think with the climate change effect now we're going to see more of this stuff?
I heard from when I interviewed experts in the film, they all acknowledge climate change and they say it's a problem. But then you talk to other people who talk about historically, 50 years ago, there were major storms. There were different extremes in weather. A lot of the problems we have now are people are living in more vulnerable areas. So more people are living at the coast, more people are living in the woods, more people are living in places that are prone to disasters. So when that disaster hits, the impact is worse because it's more crowded. The population is higher. So my thought about climate change is whether or not you believe in it, and I certainly listen to the experts and see what they're saying and completely understand it. That doesn't mean you still don't need to do something. So if you're a climate change believer or a climate change denier, the facts are disasters are happening more frequently and the damage is getting worse. So you need to do something about it. Then we can argue about climate change. Even if we tried to sit down right now and say, we're going to solve climate change, that's not going to help you for the next 15 or 20 years. It's not going to help you if you're living in a vulnerable area. That's something that should motivate you. But what should make you actually do it is the fact that these things keep happening and you don't want it to happen to you.
Now, is there, I want to focus in on something here. You said there's vulnerable areas in the United States. Obviously, the coasts are definitely vulnerable, whether we're talking about the Eastern Seaboard or down into where you are in Tampa, but and also the California coastline. What about inland? Is there really vulnerable areas in Middle America, for example?
Sure. Anywhere east of the Rockies, across the plains, because if you look at that, what happens? The cold air in Canada travels down into the central part of the country, gets pushed down into the central part of the country, and then that moist, humid air from the Gulf of Mexico gets pumped up into the middle part of the country. So you have that clash of air masses. Cold air mixing with the warm, moist air just makes it ripe for severe storms. And we see it every spring. We've seen some really bad storms this summer. We've seen a lot of flooding, flash flooding from areas that the rain just piles on these places. So because of the way the United States is laid out and the different dynamics that occur, we have very volatile weather, whether it's heavy snow in the Rockies, whether it's tornadoes in the Central Plains, whether it's storms anywhere along the Gulf Coast and the East Coast of the United States with hurricanes. It all can happen. And then the West Coast is just a big bullseye for a major earthquake.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in an earthquake. I don't think I want to experience that. But
you don't. I've been in several, and they scare the heck out of me. I think the earthquakes are the most scary natural disaster to me because you get no warning. It just happens. Then I would say tornadoes, although that's not a huge concern where I live, but it does happen and people get damaged by it. A hurricane, at least you see it coming. It's scary once it gets there, but you can't say it really completely caught you off guard. I was at the World Series in 1989 in Candlestick Park when the earthquake hit, and that was frightening.
I remember seeing that. Yeah, I remember that. It is, it's all of this is very important and timely, and what's really great is this documentary you did, The Last House Standing. How are you finding people reacting to The Last House Standing? What's the kind of reaction that you're getting with this particular documentary?
I'm touched by how positive it actually is. We got in 16 film festivals, so we got a lot of recognition, but every one of them for live appearances, going there and being the director and getting to talk to the audience was canceled because of COVID. So just a few weeks ago, we had our first live screening in Charleston, South Carolina. And I got to talk to people right after watching the film, and they loved it. They were so positive. They understood the message. They were impacted by it. It brought back memories of of storms that have hit them in different areas. So the response online has been terrific. So what I would do is encourage everybody to go to thelasthousestanding.org, and you can rent the film on our website for $3.99. If you have a large group or organization, you can license the film to show it to your group through our website. And if you say, I don't want to pay this lowly film director a penny, I don't want to pay for his film, it's on Tubi TV, Tubi TV. You can watch it for free. And you can also check the public television station in your area, because I know we were on a number of public television stations. And I think it's important for people to see the film. I think if you watch this film and don't do something, I would be surprised, because it gets people's attention and it's very impactful.
That's a thing I want to sort of touch on as well. What is the reaction when people see your documentary? What's like? Do their eyes sort of just bulge open and go, "Oh, is that the kind of reaction you're getting?"
I think they can relate to the people in there because those people all didn't think it could happen to them. And so the people in the film, their attitude represents all of us. You know, most of us are not prepared for disasters. If you read The Three Little Pigs, most of us have the straw house,
Yes.
right? So a few of us have brick houses, concrete houses, what I like to say is the equivalent of a brick house, but it's much better. But most people don't. You know, most people spend a lot of money remodeling their house and dressing it up. Most people don't make sure their windows are safe or their house, the roof is bracketed to the walls, and the trees aren't vulnerable for falling on their house and destroying their property. So I think most people can relate to that. They see these victims and they go, wow, that is very powerful. Now, whether they actually go and do something after that, you know, that's kind of beyond my control. As a filmmaker, I like to lay the story out there, show you what could happen, and hope that it motivates you to do something. But I can't actually make you do it.
No, it's got to be them. And the other thing too, I think that it's important to address here is that it's about education, and I take it that's the whole premise of this film. One of the things I've noticed that we haven't sort of touched on is Katrina. Has that come up in, or did that come up in The Last House Standing? Did that film, or did that particular tragedy come into the documentary at all?
It did not. The FEMA director referred to some of the storms that have happened and the damage that they've dealt with, but we were focusing on more recent things that had just happened. So Hurricane Michael, the Woolsey fire in Malibu, the Paradise fire in Northern California, all the tornadoes that have struck Moore, Oklahoma. So we did not talk about Katrina, but that's an example of things going bad. And, you know, it seems like the people that have the least to lose get hurt the most when there's a storm. So if you look at a place like Louisiana, you know, there's a lot of people living along the coast there that are struggling. And so when a storm comes through and does major damage to them, some of them never recover. It's just a life-changing situation.
And I think that's what you're trying to get across. This is preventable by taking actions, building better homes, preparing for the disaster, and keeping a watch on the weather are the key things that you're trying to basically promote in this documentary. Would I be correct in that assumption?
Sure, that would be a fair assessment. And you know, the reality is we have a lot of the cures for the illness here, but who's going to be the hero and do something about it? So if every builder tomorrow said, okay, we're going to stop building garbage and we're only going to build houses we're not going to do code, which the building code means, well, maybe you'll survive as a person living in that house, but the house may not. We're going to do what it takes to survive the local hazards, and we're just going to build homes that way. Problem would be solved. Now you'd still have damage. You can't guarantee, you know, if an EF5 tornado or a Category 5 hurricane steamrolls you, there's going to be damage. And that's why you want to be prepared and have insurance and know what you have to do to evacuate. But still, the problem could be solved by building better houses. That's not going to happen on its own. So that's why I encourage people to demand more. Don't buy somebody else's garbage. If you're looking at a house and somebody has a 20-year-old house and you're walking through and you go, wow, this house isn't very well built, but I really need a house, don't reward them for buying the garbage to begin with, and then they pass it on to you. You're just taking somebody's problem that they didn't fix. And it's like playing musical chairs. Eventually, there's going to be no chair left to sit on, right? It's the same with houses. Disaster happens all the time. Eventually, it's going to find you. I hate it. And when the market is really hot like it is now, fortunately, it's cooling off here in Florida a little bit, is people are so desperate that if you don't buy the house, you know somebody else is going to, because they're going to get multiple offers. The values are through the roof. But just don't reward bad building.
Yeah, and that's an important takeaway here. And I think that the positive in the end of all of this is that we have this great documentary out there that showcases all the things that could go wrong, and giving you the tools and the inspiration to actually make sure that that message gets told. What's the next big thing for you? What are you going to do now after this? Is there more of this kind of documentary that you're going to do?
Well, you know, the toughest part of making any film is you have to raise money to do it. And that's the biggest challenge. You know, it's especially, you know, there's some documentaries you can make on a small budget, but when you're doing a storm and damage video, you have to go to a bunch of places and so it costs money. We're trying to have an extended version of The Last House Standing. I'm also working on a few other projects that we're out there fundraising for. So, you know, it's I have a podcast called Tell Us How to Make It Better for anybody that listens to podcasts. And every week I interview somebody who has identified a problem and is doing something to try to make it better. They're problem solvers. So if you, any podcast platform, look for Tell Us How to Make It Better. And I do that on a regular basis. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, on our website, thelasthousestanding.org, we've put together a document that you can download for free. It's called Questions Every Buyer Must Ask Their Builder or Seller. And there's just a list of questions on here that you should ask them. And if they don't know the answers, I wouldn't buy their stuff that they're selling. You know, ask them about the natural disasters. Ask them what they built the house to withstand. Who verified that the house is safe? I even like to ask about, and because this has burned me many times, ask who the superintendent was on the job, how long they've been with the company, and are they going to still be with the company after building your house? Because if they're not, they weren't checked in. And you want to know that everyone was on their A game. And if the builder pushes back and says, you're a pain in the ass, I don't want to tell you all this stuff, don't buy their house.
Good advice. And, you know, I think we'll end on that because basically that's the whole point. Don't buy it if it's junk, and don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be that lady in the situation where the only thing you had was a bathtub and a mattress. Yeah, it got your life, but it's wonderful, but you lost everything, and that's a shocking thing to have to experience. George Siegal, it has been a pleasure to speak with you today regarding The Last House Standing. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
Okay, I'm easy to find. The thelasthousestanding.org is where they can consume the film. There's a contact form on there if they have questions or want to talk to me. They can reach me through my podcast, Tell Us How to Make It Better. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, you name it. I'm easy to reach, so nobody has an excuse. If they want to reach out, they can get me.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you again for doing this. You've been watching Candid Conversations on YouTube and also on our blog at oneononecandidconversations.com. You can check out the website as mentioned. And George, again, a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for having me on, Cliff. I appreciate it.